The arrogant challenge, the unwelcome message, the frontier observation post. Delta 7 floated silently in the darkness between star systems, a solitary human outpost monitoring the edge of explored space. Captain Elena Vasquez was reviewing mineral survey reports from the nearby asteroid belt when every communication system in the station suddenly activated simultaneously. Alarms blared across the control deck. Warning lights painted the walls in urgent red strobes. Elena dropped her tablet and rushed to the main console where Lieutenant Marcus Webb was already working frantically to regain control of their systems. His hands moved across the holographic controls, but nothing responded to his commands. Every screen displayed the same thing: an incoming transmission that had overridden every protocol, every firewall, every security measure they possessed. "Captain, I can't shut it down," Marcus said, his voice tight with frustration. "Whatever this is, it's using technology I've never seen before. It's broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't even be possible." Elena steadied herself against the console and straightened her uniform. "Then I guess we're meant to watch. Put it on the main display." The central view screen flickered and revealed something that made everyone in the control room fall silent. The being that appeared stood at least 9 feet tall, its form humanoid but distinctly alien. Crystalline structures grew from its shoulders and head like a crown of living gemstones. Its skin shimmered with colors that seemed to shift between purple and deep blue. 4 eyes arranged vertically on its elongated face stared out from the screen with obvious contempt. The creature wore elaborate robes embedded with glowing symbols that pulsed with their own inner light. "Primitive creatures of the species called humanity," the being spoke, its voice resonating with harmonics that made the station's walls vibrate slightly. The universal translator struggled to process the complexity of its language. "I am High Commander Zarthek of the Kryn Dominion, voice of the Eternal Throne, master of 300 conquered worlds." Elena crossed her arms and watched without expression. She had dealt with self-important bureaucrats before, though admittedly none quite this theatrical. The declaration of superiority. Zarthek continued his speech with the confidence of someone who had never been contradicted. "For 6,000 years, the Kryn Dominion has brought order to the chaotic regions of space. We have encountered 147 different species. Each recognized their place in the natural hierarchy. Each understood that the Kryn represent the pinnacle of civilization, technology, and military might." The display changed to show images of the Kryn Empire. Massive cities that seemed grown rather than built, with towers reaching into the clouds, fleets of ships that numbered in the thousands, each one adorned with the same glowing symbols as Zarthek's robes. Then came images that were clearly meant to intimidate. Planets reduced to rubble, species kneeling in submission, monuments to Kryn dominance standing on countless worlds. "Your species has begun expanding into regions of space that the Dominion has designated as buffer territories," Zarthek said, his 4 eyes seeming to focus with laser intensity through the screen. "This expansion demonstrates either remarkable ignorance or suicidal arrogance. I am inclined to believe it is ignorance, as no species that understood the power of the Kryn would dare such actions." Lieutenant Webb glanced at Elena, who gave him a slight shake of her head. "Not yet. Let the alien finish his performance. The Kryn Dominion has studied your species during your brief and unremarkable expansion into space. Your technology is primitive. Your ships are crude. Your weapons are laughable. You have achieved interstellar travel barely 2 centuries ago. We were traveling between stars when your ancestors were living in caves and worshipping fire." Marcus couldn't help himself. "Did he just compare us to cavemen?" he whispered. Elena allowed herself a slight smile. "I think he did." The ultimatum. Zarthek raised one of his 4-fingered hands in a gesture that was clearly meant to be commanding. "The Eternal Throne, in its infinite wisdom and mercy, has decided to offer humanity a single opportunity. You will immediately withdraw from all systems within the designated buffer zone. You will cease all exploration and expansion activities. You will submit to Kryn oversight and accept your position as a client species under Dominion protection." The display shifted again, this time showing a map of human-controlled space. 17 colonies were highlighted in pulsing red. "These territories will be evacuated within 10 of your standard days. Failure to comply will result in forceful removal. Your species will also provide resources as tribute to the Dominion. We calculate that 15% of your total economic output for the next century would be appropriate compensation for your territorial violations." Someone in the background of the control room laughed, then quickly stifled it when others turned to look. Zarthek's 4 eyes narrowed. You find this amusing? Perhaps you do not understand the gravity of your situation. The Kryn Dominion has eliminated 17 species that refuse to accept the natural order. We possess weapons that can ignite atmospheres, technology that can destabilize stars, and military forces that have never known defeat in 6 millennia of expansion. He leaned closer to whatever camera was transmitting his image. I am bringing 1,000 warships to your frontier territories. Each vessel is powered by zero-point energy extraction. Each carries weapons that harness the fundamental forces of the universe. Your primitive kinetic weapons and chemical rockets cannot stand against technology that your scientists likely believe to be theoretical impossibilities. The High Commander straightened his crystalline crown. In 10 days, the Kryn fleet will arrive at your outpost designated Delta 7. If you have not begun evacuations, we will demonstrate our power by destroying that station and everything within 5 light years of it. This is not a negotiation. This is an inevitability. The only choice you have is whether your species accepts this peacefully or learns through painful examples. The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun. The control room systems returned to normal operation. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Lieutenant Webb let out a breath he had been holding. Captain, that was probably the most pretentious thing I've ever witnessed, and I once sat through a 4-hour presentation from Admiral Chen about proper uniform regulations. Humanity's response. Elena was already at her console, fingers moving rapidly across the controls. Marcus, send everything we just recorded to Terran Central Command. Flag it as urgent but not emergency. Include a note that we're dealing with what appears to be a first contact situation with a hostile but remarkably overconfident species. Already done, Captain. The transmission went out simultaneously to every human outpost in colony. This Zarthek character broadcast his speech across every possible frequency. Half the colonies probably saw it live. Elena pulled up the communication logs and saw that Marcus was right. The Kryn's message had reached everyone from the inner worlds to the furthest frontier settlements. She could already see response messages flooding back through the network. Let's see what Central Command wants us to do, she said, pulling up the priority channel. The response came through in less than 5 minutes, which was remarkably fast considering it had to travel from Earth through several relay stations. Admiral James Morrison appeared on the screen. He was a man in his 70s with white hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in space. He was also, Elena noticed, trying very hard not to smile. Captain Vasquez, I trust you received the same entertaining broadcast that the rest of humanity just witnessed? Yes, sir. The Kryn Dominion has given us 10 days to evacuate 17 colonies and submit to their authority. They did indeed. Morrison's expression turned more serious, though his eyes still held amusement. Central Command has reviewed the transmission and consulted with our xenology experts, military intelligence, and diplomatic corps. Our response has been approved at the highest levels. What are our orders, sir? Morrison leaned back in his chair. Tell the Kryn that humanity respectfully declines their generous offer. Use exactly those words. Then sit tight and wait for them to arrive. The 3rd Defense Fleet will be in position at Delta 7 within 6 days. Do not evacuate. Do not show any signs of concern. Just continue your normal operations. Elena felt a surge of confidence. Understood, sir. Should I elaborate on our refusal? Absolutely not. Keep it simple. Keep it polite. And Captain? Morrison's smile finally broke through. Try not to laugh when you send it. I know it's tempting. The communication ended. Elena composed a brief response message, read it over twice to make sure it struck exactly the right tone of professional dismissal, and transmitted it on the same frequencies the Kryn had used. Message to High Commander Zarthek of the Kryn Dominion. Humanity has received and reviewed your proposal. We respectfully decline. Captain Elena Vasquez, Terran Frontier Service. The viral phenomenon. Within hours, the Kryn's theatrical ultimatum and humanity's casual rejection became the most discussed event in human space. The civilian networks exploded with commentary, analysis, and an astonishing amount of humor. Someone had already created an animated version of Zarthek's speech where his crystalline crown kept falling off. Another had edited together a comparison video showing various historical examples of empires that had underestimated their opponents. Set to comedic music, Elena's personal favorite was a simple image that spread across every social media platform. Zartek's angry face next to a human shrugging. With the caption, 6,000 years of conquering primitives, versus 200 years of humans being absolutely done with everyone's nonsense. The news networks tried to maintain appropriate seriousness while discussing the potential threat, but even the most professional anchors couldn't entirely hide their skepticism. A retired general appeared on one broadcast and provided analysis that quickly became famous. The Kryn have been conquering species that barely achieved fusion power, she explained, gesturing at tactical displays. They've never fought anyone with distributed network warfare, quantum encrypted communications, or adaptive defense systems. They're bringing 1,000 ships. We could handle that with a dozen properly equipped vessels, but we're sending an entire fleet because we're not savages. We believe in overwhelming superiority, not risky gambles. Military personnel across human space shared the broadcast with knowing nods. The Proxima conflicts had taught humanity harsh lessons about warfare between technological equals. Those brutal decades of human fighting human had forged military doctrines based on efficiency, adaptability, and the assumption that your enemy was just as clever as you were. Preparations begin over the next 6 days. The 3rd Defense Fleet assembled at Delta 7 with minimal fanfare. Ships arrived in small groups, took their assigned positions, and began standard operational procedures. To any outside observer, it might have looked like a routine fleet exercise rather than preparation for potential combat. Captain Vasquez watched from her station as 97 vessels formed a loose defensive sphere around Delta 7. They ranged from small frigates to massive battle carriers, each one representing the cutting edge of human military technology. But unlike the Kryn's ornate warships covered in glowing symbols and ceremonial decorations, human vessels were purely functional. Clean lines, minimal external features, and designs optimized for effectiveness rather than intimidation. Admiral Morrison's flagship, the Resolution, took position at the fleet's center. Elena received a direct communication request from the Admiral shortly after his arrival. Captain, how are your people holding up? Honestly, sir, they're more curious than concerned. Half my crew has been running simulations trying to guess what Kryn technology actually looks like versus what it's supposed to do according to their propaganda. Morrison nodded. That's the right attitude. Our intelligence analysis suggests the Kryn have been truthful about one thing. They do have advanced energy manipulation technology. Their zero-point reactors are legitimate and their weapons are probably quite powerful by conventional standards. But they've never faced adaptive shielding, networked point defense, or weapons that don't care about energy dissipation because they're not energy weapons. They've been using the same tactics for thousands of years because those tactics have always worked against species that were technologically inferior. Elena understood immediately. They're going to try to break through our shields with their energy weapons, and when that doesn't work, they won't have a backup plan. Exactly. And that's when things will get interesting. Morrison's expression turned more serious. Captain, I want to be clear about our rules of engagement. We will not fire first. We will not escalate unnecessarily. But if they attack, we will respond with sufficient force to end the engagement decisively. Is that understood? Perfectly, sir. The Kryn arrive on the 10th day, exactly when Zarthek had promised. Space rippled with the distinctive distortion of faster-than-light arrival. 1,000 Kryn warships emerged from their quantum tunnels in perfect formation. Each vessel was a work of art by their standards, shaped like elongated crystals with surfaces that glowed with inner light. They arranged themselves in layers, creating a three-dimensional lattice that extended for thousands of kilometers. It was, Elena had to admit, visually impressive. The Kryn clearly valued aesthetics alongside function. Their fleet looked like a floating city made of luminous gemstones. From her observation post, Elena could see the Resolution and the other human ships maintaining their positions. They didn't scatter in panic. They didn't rush to defensive formations. They simply waited with the patience of people who knew exactly what they were doing. A communication request came through. Elena accepted it and found herself looking at High Commander Zarthek once again. His four eyes showed surprise that quickly shifted to anger. You did not evacuate. You did not flee. Instead, you brought warships? His crystalline crown flared brighter with what Elena assumed was aggression. I admire courage even when it is misplaced. But this is foolishness that borders on insanity. You face 1,000 vessels of the Kryn Dominion with less than 100 of your primitive craft. Admiral Morrison's face appeared in a split-screen view. His expression was calm, almost bored. High Commander Zarthek, I am Admiral James Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. Your ultimatum has been rejected. We will not be evacuating our territories, submitting to your authority or paying tribute. This region of space has been settled by humanity, and we intend to remain here. Zarthek's four eyes widened in what might have been disbelief. You cannot possibly believe you can stand against the might of the Dominion. This is your final opportunity to surrender. Withdraw now and your species may survive as subjects rather than cautionary tales. Morrison leaned forward slightly. Negative. If you wish to establish diplomatic relations on equal terms, we're willing to discuss that. If you intend to attack, we will defend ourselves. The choice is entirely yours. For a long moment, Zarthek simply stared from the screen. Then his expression hardened into something cold and merciless. So be it. The Kryn have destroyed species for far less arrogance. You will serve as an example to any others who might forget their place. The communication cut off. Elena watched as the Kryn fleet began moving forward, maintaining their geometric formation. Energy readings spiked across her sensors as the alien vessels charged their weapon systems. All hands battle stations. Morrison's voice came through the fleet-wide channel, calm and professional. Activate defensive systems. Weapons free on my command. Remember your training, trust your equipment, and let's show these crystalline peacocks why picking fights with humans is a historically bad decision. Elena couldn't help but smile as her crew moved to their positions with practiced efficiency. The Kryn had conquered 147 species over 6,000 years. They had never lost a battle. They had never been challenged by an opponent with comparable technology. That perfect record was about to end in the most educational way possible. The first Kryn weapons fired, sending streams of coherent energy across the void toward the human fleet. The beams were beautiful in their way, ribbons of purple and blue light carrying enough power to vaporize mountains. They struck the human defensive screens and simply disappeared, absorbed and redirected by adaptive field generators that had been designed through centuries of warfare between humans who understood each other's capabilities. Zarthek had brought overwhelming force against what he assumed were primitives. He had followed tactics that had worked flawlessly for millennia. He had never considered that those tactics might fail because he had never encountered an enemy that wasn't inferior. The High Commander of the Kryn Dominion was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his very long life. Humanity had spent 200 years preparing for wars against themselves, and any species that thought they could intimidate or overpower humans had fundamentally misunderstood what made humanity dangerous. The battle for Delta 7 was about to begin, and it would not go the way the Kryn expected. The Reckoning. The illusion Shatter's High Commander Zarthek watched from the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Radiance, as his weapons fire struck the human defensive positions. The purple and blue energy streams that had shattered the defenses of countless species crossed the void with lethal precision. Each beam carried enough concentrated power to boil oceans or crack continental plates. The Kryn weapon masters had perfected these systems over thousands of years, refining them through 147 successful conquests. The beam struck the human fleet and vanished, not deflected, not absorbed with visible strain. They simply disappeared as if they had never existed. The energy readings showed the power reaching the human vessels, but then the sensors registered nothing. No explosions, no damage, no effect whatsoever. Weapons Master Krelix, explain what I am seeing, Zarthek demanded, his four eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed his entire forward line, firing with zero results. Krelix, a veteran of 30 conquest campaigns, stared at his console with visible confusion. His crystalline structures dimmed slightly, a Kryn indication of distress. High Commander, our weapons are functioning perfectly. The energy output is within expected parameters, but the human vessels appear to be surrounded by some form of field that is dissipating our beams before impact. The energy is being redirected through what my sensors suggest is controlled spatial distortion. Spatial distortion? That is theoretical technology. Even our greatest scientists have not achieved practical application of such systems. Nevertheless, High Commander, that appears to be what we face. Our weapons are designed to overcome conventional shielding through raw power. These human defenses are not blocking our attacks. They are making our attacks irrelevant by altering the space around their vessels. Zarthek felt something he had not experienced in decades of military service: uncertainty. He had studied the human transmission intercepts. Their entertainment media, their news broadcasts, their public communications all suggested a species barely beyond early space exploration. Their ships looked primitive, simple geometric shapes without the elegant beauty of Kryn design. Everything indicated they should be technologically inferior. Increase power to weapons. Focus fire on their largest vessel. If we cannot penetrate their defenses with dispersed fire, we will overwhelm a single point with concentrated assault. The human counter aboard the Resolution, Admiral Morrison watched the Kryn response with professional interest. Tactical displays showed the alien fleet adjusting their formation, concentrating their firepower on his flagship. Dozens of energy beams converged on the Resolution's position, each one powerful enough to destroy a lesser vessel. The adaptive gravitational shearing fields around Morrison's ship bent space itself, creating regions where the physical laws governing energy propagation simply didn't work the way the Kryn weapons expected. The concentrated assault produced impressive visual effects as the redirected energy illuminated the distorted space around the Resolution, but the ship itself remained completely untouched. "Interesting approach," Morrison commented to his tactical officer, Commander Sarah Chen. "They're trying to brute force through our defenses. Shows a certain lack of imagination." Chen nodded, her fingers moving across holographic controls that displayed threat assessments and firing solutions. "Their doctrine appears to be based entirely on superior firepower, overwhelming inferior defenses. They've probably never encountered an enemy that could simply negate their primary weapons. How long until they realize this isn't working?" "I'd estimate another 30 seconds, sir. Their commanders will need time to accept that their fundamental assumptions about combat are wrong." Morrison glanced at the countdown timer on his display. 37 seconds since the Kryn had opened fire. According to their intelligence analysis, the Kryn typically won battles within the first minute through sheer overwhelming force. Their entire military philosophy was built around that initial devastating assault, breaking enemy resistance. "All ships, prepare to return fire. Target their shield generators and propulsion systems. I want to disable, not destroy. Let's try to keep casualties minimal on both sides." "Firing solutions locked, Admiral. All vessels report ready." Morrison took a breath. This was the moment that would define first contact between humanity and the Kryn Dominion. How it proceeded would shape the relationship between their species for generations. "Execute." The technology gap revealed. The human fleet opened fire with weapons the Kryn had never encountered. No energy beams, no explosive missiles. Instead, the human vessels launched what appeared to be simple metal projectiles. Railgun slugs, each one weighing barely 10 kilograms, accelerated to 45% of light speed through electromagnetic induction. At those velocities, mass became devastation. Each slug carried kinetic energy equivalent to several nuclear weapons. The physics were brutal and unavoidable. Kinetic energy equaled 1/2 mass times velocity squared. When velocity reached relativistic speeds, the numbers became terrifying. The Kryn shields, designed to deflect or absorb energy weapons, tried to stop solid matter moving at nearly half the speed of light. The shields failed instantly. The physics simply didn't allow for any other outcome. Energy shields worked by dispersing or redirecting energy. They had minimal effect on solid mass moving at relativistic speeds. The railgun slugs punched through the Kryn shields as if they weren't there, struck the crystalline hulls of the alien warships, and transferred their enormous kinetic energy in microseconds. The results were catastrophic. Kryn vessels didn't explode so much as they came apart, their structural integrity overwhelmed by forces their designers had never anticipated. In the first 3 seconds of human counterfire, 47 Kryn warships were completely destroyed. Another 63 were disabled, their propulsion systems shattered, their weapons offline, their crews either dead or desperately trying to reach escape pods. The geometric perfection of the Kryn formation dissolved into chaos. Ships that had maintained precise positions for thousands of years of military tradition scattered in all directions, their commanders finally understanding they faced something completely outside their experience. Zarthek's realization, On the bridge of the Eternal Radiance, alarms screamed across every system. Zarthek stared at the tactical display showing the destruction of more than 10% of his fleet in seconds. The numbers couldn't be right. This wasn't possible. The Kryn Dominion had never lost ships at this rate. Even during the conquest of the Thorian Collective, their most difficult campaign, they had lost only 15 vessels over a 3-month siege. He had lost 47 in 3 seconds. Evasive maneuvers. He shouted, but his helmsman was already moving. The Eternal Radiance broke formation, its quantum engines pushing the massive vessel into a desperate turn that would have been unthinkable minutes ago when they had been advancing in confident military precision. "High Commander, our shields are completely ineffective against their weapons," Krelix reported, his voice carrying an edge of panic that Zarthek had never heard from the veteran weapons master. "They are using kinetic projectiles at relativistic velocities. The mass energy transfer is beyond anything our defenses were designed to counter. How is this possible? They should not have this technology. Clearly, High Commander, our intelligence was catastrophically wrong." Another wave of human fire lashed out. This time, Zarthek could see it happening in real time on the enhanced visual displays. Tiny points of light streaked from the human vessels, moving so fast they were barely visible. Each point of light reached a Kryn ship and turned it into expanding clouds of debris. The human vessels didn't just have one type of weapon. As the Kryn fleet scattered, the humans launched what appeared to be missiles. But these weren't the slow, easily intercepted projectiles the Kryn expected. These missiles accelerated at rates that should have been impossible, pulling maneuvers that would have liquefied any organic crew. They had to be entirely automated, guided by artificial intelligence systems far more sophisticated than anything the Kryn possessed. The Kryn Point Defense Systems, designed to intercept conventional missiles, tried to engage. They managed to destroy perhaps 1 in every 20 missiles. The rest found their targets with precision that suggested they were communicating with each other, coordinating their attacks, adapting to Kryn defensive measures in real time. The massacre continues. Captain Elena Vasquez watched from Delta 7 as the battle unfolded. Her tactical display showed the human fleet maintaining their defensive positions, not pursuing the scattering Kryn vessels, simply defending their space with ruthless efficiency. Every Kryn ship that continued to show hostile intent became a target. Every vessel that powered down weapons and attempted to retreat was allowed to leave. The message was clear. Humanity would defend itself completely, but this wasn't genocide. This was a military engagement with specific objectives. "Captain, I'm receiving distress signals from multiple Kryn vessels," Lieutenant Webb reported. "Some of them are requesting assistance. Their life support systems are failing." Elena looked at the tactical display showing damaged Kryn ships drifting in the void, their crews likely dying in the cold of space. She opened a channel to Admiral Morrison. "Sir, we're receiving Kryn distress calls. Request permission to render assistance to disabled vessels." Morrison's response came immediately. "Permission granted, Captain. Dispatch rescue teams to any Kryn ship broadcasting distress. Let's show them what civilized species do after a battle." Within minutes, human rescue shuttles were moving toward the most severely damaged Kryn vessels. The shuttles were small, fast, and carried medical teams trained in xenobiology. It was another aspect of human space operations that the Kryn had not anticipated. Humanity prepared for every contingency, including providing emergency assistance to enemies. Surrender the battle, if it could even be called that, lasted 17 minutes from first shot to final ceasefire. When it ended, the Kryn Dominion had lost 218 vessels destroyed and another 347 disabled. Human casualties numbered 0. Not a single human ship had been damaged beyond minor stress to their defensive systems. High Commander Zarthek sat on his command throne aboard the Eternal Radiance and tried to process what had happened. 6,000 years of military dominance, 147 species conquered, countless battles won, and in 17 minutes humanity had demonstrated that all of it meant nothing against an opponent with superior technology and tactics. His communications officer spoke quietly. "High Commander, we are receiving a transmission from the human admiral." "Put it through," Zarthek said, his voice carrying none of its earlier confidence. Admiral Morrison appeared on the screen. He looked tired but professional. No gloating, no mockery, just a military officer who had completed an unpleasant but necessary task. High Commander Zarthek, this engagement is over. Your fleet is defeated. You have two options available. Option 1. You withdraw immediately, take your damaged vessels, collect your dead, and return to Kryn space. You will not return to this region. You will not threaten human colonies. You will leave us alone, and we will leave you alone. Zarthek waited for the second option, knowing it would be worse. Option 2. You continue this engagement, and we will be forced to disable or destroy the remainder of your fleet. We don't want to do that. We don't enjoy killing. But we will absolutely defend our people and our territory. The choice is yours, but you need to make it now. For a long moment, Zarthek considered his options. Pride demanded he continue fighting. 6,000 years of tradition demanded he never surrender. But wisdom and survival instinct told him the truth. His fleet had lost. Completely, utterly, and humiliatingly lost. We will withdraw, he said, the words tasting like poison. But know this, Admiral Morrison. The Kryn Dominion will not forget this defeat. We will study your technology. We will adapt our tactics. We will return. Morrison's expression didn't change. High Commander, I hope you'll reconsider that position. Humanity doesn't want to be your enemy. We're willing to establish diplomatic relations, share technology, work together. But if you insist on viewing this as the beginning of a longer war, I need to tell you something important. What is that? Everything you saw today represents technology that humanity developed 20 years ago. We've moved on. We have newer systems, better weapons, more advanced defenses. If you spend the next decade preparing to fight what you saw today, you'll be preparing to fight an enemy that no longer exists. We'll be even further ahead. The Admiral leaned forward slightly. The Kryn Dominion has been conquering primitive species for 6,000 years. You've never fought anyone near your technological level. Humanity has been preparing for war against ourselves for 2 centuries. We assume our enemies are just as smart, just as capable, and just as determined as we are. That makes us very different from what you're used to. Morrison sat back. Go home, High Commander. Tell your eternal throne what happened here, and think very carefully about whether you want humanity as an enemy or as a neighbor. We're flexible either way. The transmission ended. Zarthek sat in silence for several minutes before giving the order to withdraw. The surviving Kryn vessels limped away from human space, many of them damaged, all of them carrying crews who would never forget what they had witnessed. Aftermath and revelation over the following days, the full scope of the engagement became clear across both human and galactic space. Human networks were filled with analysis, discussion, and a surprising amount of relief that the conflict had ended quickly with minimal loss of life on both sides. The rescue operations particularly captured public attention. Images of human medical teams working frantically to save Kryn crew members became symbols of humanity's approach to conflict. Fight when necessary, but never lose sight of basic compassion. For the Kryn Dominion, the defeat sent shockwaves through their entire civilization. For the first time in 6,000 years, they had encountered a species not only capable of defeating them, but doing so with almost casual ease. The recordings of the battle, transmitted by surviving Kryn vessels, were analyzed by their greatest military minds. The conclusions were sobering. Humanity possessed technology that the Kryn had believed was decades or centuries away from practical application. More importantly, humanity had developed that technology not through conquest but through innovation, driven by internal competition and conflict. The humans had spent 2 centuries fighting themselves, and that brutal internal warfare had created military capabilities far beyond what the Kryn had achieved through external conquest. Other species in the region watched the battle recordings with intense interest. The Kryn had been the dominant power for millennia, their expansion limited only by their own pace of conquest. Now a new species had emerged that could not only resist the Kryn, but defeat them decisively. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of Delta 7 6 days after the battle, watching human and Kryn vessels working together to recover debris and search for survivors. It was a strange sight, former enemies now cooperating in the shared work of cleaning up after conflict. Lieutenant Webb joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and stood beside her, looking out at the recovery operations. "You know what's funny, Captain?" he said after a moment. The Kryn spent 6,000 years conquering species they considered primitive. They built their entire identity around being superior, being unstoppable, and then they picked a fight with us and discovered they weren't as advanced as they thought. Elena sipped her coffee. It's a lesson every empire learns eventually. The Romans thought they were unstoppable until they met the Germanic tribes. The Mongols thought they were invincible until they tried to conquer Japan. Power and confidence are dangerous when they're not backed by realistic assessment of your opponents. Do you think they'll come back? Try again with better preparation? Maybe, but I think Admiral Morrison was right. By the time they develop countermeasures to what they saw, we'll have moved even further ahead. And hopefully they'll realize that cooperation serves everyone better than conflict. Webb nodded slowly. It's weird, isn't it? We didn't want this fight. We just wanted to live in our colonies and explore our region of space. But when someone threatened us, we responded with overwhelming force. That's very human. It is, Elena agreed. We're peaceful until we're not. We prefer cooperation until someone makes that impossible. And when we fight to win decisively so we can return to peace as quickly as possible. The Kryn expected barbarians who would either submit or die fighting. Instead, they got precisely calculated military force designed to end the conflict with minimal casualties and maximum effectiveness. A new understanding. 3 weeks after the battle, formal diplomatic channels opened between humanity and the Kryn Dominion. The negotiations were tense but productive. The Kryn, still reeling from their defeat, approached the discussions with newfound humility. They proposed a non-aggression pact, recognized human territorial claims, and surprisingly, requested technological exchange agreements. Admiral Morrison represented humanity in the initial negotiations, and his approach was pragmatic and forward-thinking. Humanity agreed to share certain technologies with the Kryn in exchange for access to Kryn knowledge about other species, galactic geography, and historical information about the region. More importantly, the agreement established frameworks for peaceful coexistence and cooperation. High Commander Zarthek, who attended the negotiations personally, had changed visibly from the arrogant figure who had issued the original ultimatum. His crystalline structures seemed dimmer, and his four eyes no longer carried the same superiority and contempt. During one private conversation with Morrison, he spoke with unexpected candor. Admiral, I have spent 40 years in military service to the Dominion. I have participated in 17 conquest campaigns. I have never lost a battle until I encountered humanity. Do you know what disturbs me most about our engagement? Morrison waited for him to continue. It is not that you defeated us. It is not even that you did so with such ease. What disturbs me is that you could have destroyed my entire fleet and chose not to. You could have pursued our retreat and eliminated the Kryn as a military power. Instead, you rescued our wounded and offered us a path to coexistence. I do not understand this behavior. Morrison considered his response carefully. High Commander, humanity learned something important during our internal conflicts. Winning a battle is easy when you have superior force. Winning the peace that follows is much harder. We defeated you militarily, yes, but if we had slaughtered your fleet, we would have created an eternal enemy. By showing restraint and offering cooperation, we created the possibility of something better. A very human philosophy, Zarthek said, and perhaps one that the Kryn need to learn. The galaxy takes notice. The news of humanity's decisive victory over the Kryn Dominion spread quickly through known space. Species that had feared or respected the Kryn for millennia suddenly became very interested in establishing relations with humanity. Trade proposals arrived daily. Diplomatic missions requested meetings. Scientific institutions wanted to exchange knowledge. Humanity, for its part, approached these new relationships with cautious optimism. The encounter with the Kryn had demonstrated that human technology was competitive or superior to established galactic powers. But it had also shown that the galaxy was full of civilizations with thousands of years of history and development. There was much to learn and much to share. Captain Vasquez received a promotion and a new assignment. She would command humanity's first dedicated diplomatic vessel, traveling to various species to establish formal relationships and cultural exchanges. It was a role she had never expected, but found herself looking forward to. On her final day at Delta 7, she stood once more on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Kryn were rebuilding and reconsidering their place in the galaxy. Other species were watching humanity with new interest and respect. And humanity itself was beginning to understand its role in the larger galactic community. Lieutenant Webb joined her one last time. Nervous about your new assignment, Captain? A little, Elena admitted. Commanding a space station is one thing, Representing humanity to dozens of different alien species is something else entirely. You'll do great. You've already shown that humans can stand up to threats and extend hands in friendship. That's exactly what we need out there. Elena smiled. Thanks, Marcus. And remember, you're in charge of Delta 7 now. Try not to start any more wars with ancient empires. I'll do my best, Captain. Though I have to say, if another species shows up making threats, at least now we know exactly how to handle it. They both laughed, and Elena reflected on how far humanity had come. 200 years from first achieving faster-than-light travel to becoming a recognized power in galactic affairs. It had been a remarkable journey, and it was only just beginning. The Kryn had challenged humanity expecting submission or easy conquest. Instead, they had discovered a species that combined technological sophistication with tactical brilliance and an unexpected capacity for both overwhelming force and merciful restraint. It was a combination that would define humanity's role in the galaxy for centuries to come. As Elena prepared to depart for her new assignment, she thought about Admiral Morrison's words to High Commander Zarthek. Humanity had spent 2 centuries preparing for wars against themselves, always assuming their opponents would be just as intelligent and capable as they were. That assumption had created a military force capable of defeating civilizations thousands of years old. But more importantly, it had created a civilization that understood the value of peace and cooperation. The galaxy had noticed humanity, and whether through friendship or through carefully calibrated demonstrations of defensive capability, humanity would ensure they were never again underestimated or threatened by those who mistook youth for weakness. The story of humanity's first major interstellar conflict would be told for generations, not as a tale of conquest or domination, but as an example of how a young species had responded to aggression with strength, precision, and ultimately mercy. It was the beginning of humanity's true emergence as a galactic civilization, and the future looked bright with possibility.